This videotape is part of the Video Oral History Project of the Colony Public Library of the City of the Colony, Texas. This interview is with Tom Hart of 1806 Lakewood, Euless, Texas. Mr. Hart is the Assistant City Manager for the City of Euless. This interview is taking place at the Euless Municipal Complex on Monday, the 20th of May at 9:30 a.m. My name is James Althaus. I am an interviewer for the Colony Public Library Video Oral History Project. Tom, will you please state your name and tell us something about your background, such as where and when you were born, where you grew up, places you lived?
Well, my full name is Thomas Eugene Hart. I have gone by Tom for a number of years. My hometown was Texarkana, Texas. I lived there through elementary school, and then my folks were transferred to Garland, Texas. I lived there through high school. Went to Odessa Junior College on a gymnastics scholarship after that for the first 2 years of school. Had a gymnastics scholarship to Northern Illinois after that, and right before I was supposed to go, between my sophomore and junior year, I decided to stay in Odessa. I had taken a part-time job with the city of Odessa at that time for the summer, and liked what I was doing and decided I would make a career of it. It's a little bit how I actually got into the profession I'm in now. My folks' name are Marilyn and Jean Hart. They live on Lake Texoma. They've retired there now. That really takes me through beginning of my professional career.
Okay, you said you were at Odessa Junior College. After junior college, did you go on to a 4-year school to?
Yes, when I decided to stay and continue working for the city of Odessa, I changed over and started going to school in the evenings. Ended up going full-time with the city of Odessa later the next year. Went to the University of Texas at the Permian Basin, which was an upper-level school out there. Spent 2 years with the city of Odessa, going to school part-time and working for the city, and had several jobs with them. They started me out in the engineering department. They then moved me to the planning department, and then I got to finish up working in the Department of Housing and Community Development, which gave me some pretty good line experience in various departments. Then I had an opportunity to go to work for the city of Denton, Texas. They had I guess you'd call it an internship program it was actually set up for people working on a master's degree, would work for the city manager as an aide for 2 years and get some management experience directly in the manager's office. I had not finished my bachelor's degree at that point in time, but I was only about a year away from it, so they went ahead and let me have it. So in 1976, spring of 76, I went to work for the city of Denton as an administrative aide and administrative assistant later, and continued my education at North Texas University. Finished a bachelor's degree in business there. Personnel and industrial relations was the emphasis. Then started a master's in public administration, which I never finished.
Tell me a little bit about your family, your wife, children.
as I said, my mother and dad's name are Marilyn and Jean Hart. I was an only child. I have since gone on and married Susan Lynn Hart. We have no children at this time. We reside in Euless at the present time.
Okay. Going from working as an assistant in Denton and also being a student at North Texas, how did you make the transition from there to the city of the colony?
Oh, that was an interesting transition. I probably, like a lot of people, thought I was ready to tackle the world back then, and it's taken me a few more years really in this profession to learn just how much I didn't know. But about 1978, I was really getting the urge to actually be a city manager. I had been an aide to one for 2 years and had been involved in all the processes and had some very good experience. Again, a couple of years in some departments and then 2 years in the manager's office. So I felt like I was ready to tackle it, and started looking at some cities that were coming open in the area. And I noticed a job advertisement for the Colony, Texas, and I think it was called Administrative Assistant to the Council. I don't even remember exactly what the title was right now, but I sent an application down. And I got a call back from a gentleman named Joel Larkin, who was at that time doing some consulting work for the Colony, Texas. Joel asked me to meet him for lunch. So I remember we met in Louisville, Texas at, I believe it was the Ramada Inn for lunch. Oh, and this would have been 1978. We sat there, and I remember Joel trying to explain to me what the job was going to be. And I had never actually laid eyes on the colony. So, my concept of a city was basically the two cities I worked in. The city of Odessa, which was a city of 100,000, had staff of, probably 500 people. And the city of Denton, which was a city of near 50,000, but it had its own electrical system, and it had a staff of near 500 people. So that was my concept of a city. Well, Joel tried to verbally tell me what the Colony, Texas was like. He said it had just incorporated back, I guess, in January, and this would have been, I guess, April or May that he and I were talking of 1976. So it had just incorporated. They had a council. They already had their share of problems that go with a small city. The police department at about that time was going through a pretty good uproar. He said that I think the total of the employees were, I think there was a city secretary, there was an animal control officer, there was a receptionist, there was a police chief and 2 officers, but the chief had just left, so it was really just down to 2 officers. So that was the sum total of the staff at the Colony, Texas, which was, at that point, it's a city of, I guess, 7,000 some odd population. The way he made it sound was, well, it's not that much going on right now, but he basically said, Tom, at this point in your career, it'd be a good opportunity for you to come down. It is going to develop into something. So when I left that luncheon, I thought, well, okay, it doesn't sound like there's really going to be much going on down there right now, but at least it would probably very quickly, get me the title city manager, and they're going to grow fast. I can stay with them. I say that for one reason. It was somewhat misleading. The day I walked into my first meeting or first morning of the Colony, Texas, I started, and I didn't slow down for the 3 years I was there. The little quiet atmosphere that he had described to me and not being much to do, maybe it was that way until the day I got there, but the day I got there, it was just, as the gentleman that was mayor at that point in time said, and I always remember the expression that he used about the Colony, Texas. He says,
Who was that was mayor?
The mayor was Bill Longo at that time.
Okay.
And Bill had a favorite expression. He says, the colony, it's like laying track in front of a moving freight train. And I think that was a perfect expression. I mean, we were out in front of a speeding train and trying to get the track laid for it to stay on. So I went down there and walked in there, and like I said, I probably thought I knew more than I did. But I walked in the door, and it was an immediate learning experience. If I didn't know it, I had to learn it real quick. There weren't many staff at that time, as I said, but the one thing about it, the few that were there were really good people. Janice Carroll was the city secretary at that point in time. Of course, now she's city manager down there. There was a lady named Liz Carruthers, I remember, who was a receptionist that she had an accent that wouldn't quit, but she was just one of the nicest and beautiful people I've ever met. As I think it was either my mother or dad said one time, they said, you know, you worked there quite a while. Doesn't she know your name yet? Because when she would answer the phone, it was Mr. Hart, you know, which was similar to Hart, but I mean, it was close. But beautiful people. And Nick Restagno was the acting police chief when I got down there. Nick had about 6 months of total police experience at that point in time, so not exactly what you call a long tenured police officer or chief, but was doing a superior job. I mean, for the lack of experience he had, he was just doing an excellent job. So, I've got to say, there weren't many people, but they were good people that were there. Again, you've got to understand the background I had walked out of. The cities I had left, they were full-service cities. If I needed an attorney, I could walk down the hall and we had in-house attorneys. If I needed an accountant, we had in-house accountants. If I needed planners, we had planners. If you needed engineers, we had in-house engineers. All I had to do was pick up the phone and walk down the hall, and all of a sudden you had all of this expertise. We had all these senior-level staff members in those towns also. We had directors of planning, directors of public works, police chief, fire chief, accountants, directors of finance. So actually managing a town like Denton, Texas, or Odessa, Texas, in a way was easier than what I walked into because you were really managing. All you were doing was tying all those ends together. When I got down to the colony, all of a sudden I realized Tom Hart was going to have to be the director of public works, the director of finance, the director of planning. So you had to get involved in all those areas, and there weren't experts there. So that was kind of the shock that I walked into, and we started, and in retrospect, we coped. Now, having more experience and a few more years under my belt, I can see some areas that to do it over again, we might have done a little smoother, even a little better. But I think the group that we had right then, getting in and working together, I think we accomplished a lot.
I was going to ask you, what word can you call for some of these significant events which occurred during your tenure there?
I guess
that you had to deal with in your position.
Well, as I said, about the time I got there, the police department had gone through a pretty good uproar. Fortunately, I did not have to get involved in that. That was fairly well over. The only thing I had to do was to look for a new police chief. So that was the first major position that I got to hire while I was there. We went through a selection process, interviewed a number of people, finally selected a gentleman named John Steinzik. John was a sergeant on the DeSoto police force, but lived in Colony, Texas. Had an advanced law enforcement certificate, was very, very heavy into training, very active in the police associations, was a very good man. So he became our police chief. So now we were back up to a three-man police department. The events, I guess the key events that occurred during my tenure there was I started in May of 1978. My title initially was administrative assistant to the council. That's what I was hired in at. Within 30 days, that was really not a workable title because the job I immediately started fulfilling was more of a city administrator position. So about 30 days into my tenure, they did change my title. And I don't know if it was officially changed or if it was unofficially changed, but I became a city administrator because we were a general law city at that point in time.
Were you called city administrator or city manager then at that time? When did you become city manager, and how? What I guess what I'm trying to ask is, when that did happen, did you perceive yourself any differently, or?
Again, first month I was administrative assistant to the council.
Right.
About a month into it, I was called city administrator. It was January of the next year, which would have been January of '79, that the home rule charter election was passed. And at that point in time, I was officially appointed city manager. I think what people will never appreciate or understand now was city administrator or city manager. Either one was a new thing, a new being for the colony of Texas. The powers that went with that job, and typically go with that job in any other city, was a change. It had to be established. When I first, to give you some examples, when I first got there to hire a police officer, that police officer actually interviewed with the council. So initially, as city administrator, I did not have the authority to actually hire even a police officer. They actually interviewed a maintenance worker that we were going to hire. So the council was very involved at the beginning. They had to approve all expenditures at the beginning. Well, now this is not the way other cities are run with city managers. So over the first few months, I think the council had to grow confident in me, first of all. Second of all, they had to grow confident in the position itself, that they could actually turn those powers over to an individual. Eventually, I think most of them began to see that it was necessary to do that. You can't have 6 or 7 people running an organization. You have to get it down to the way the system actually works. So when the city manager, by the time I was actually appointed city manager, it wasn't a black and white situation. It wasn't a night and day situation. It was the charter that was approved did officially give me some of those powers, such as hiring and firing. So by that time, they were pretty well comfortable with me anyway. And second of all, now according to the charter, I did have that power. So I did not have to take then a police officer to the council to be interviewed. They were comfortable that between the chief and myself, we were capable of hiring good police officers. Eventually, the expenditures that where the council would have to approve expenditures in a general law city, they reached a point they didn't have to in a home rule city. And I guess one thing that I laugh about now that was kind of funny, you would go in to get your bills approved. Now you have to understand this is an after-the-fact situation. You know, you have a council meeting, you go in with a list of items that you've bought over the last month, and they have to approve it. I always wondered what would happen if they didn't approve it, since we were already bought and using these things. But I guess the best example is you'd go in and you would have bought, say, a set of tires for, whatever, $100, $200. Out of 6 people sitting there, there was always one of them that would say, well, I know I could get that a little cheaper down at XYZ because I saw that on sale down there. And they were usually right. What they didn't understand was that we could actually cost more money by the time we looked at 15 different places. And even if we did shop 15 places, they probably happened to go to the 16th place and found it for $5 cheaper. So, we tried to be prudent and we tried to shop around, but there were always somebody telling us, I could have gotten that cheaper, and saved $5. It would have cost me $50 in staff time, but anyway, that was one of those interesting experiences. Some of the other big events, probably one of the most major events that happened very early on was the transition of the colony fire department. When I got to the colony, the fire department was a separate entity that had been set up prior to the city even being formed. There was a association, volunteer fire association. The volunteer firemen actually elected their chiefs. Just before I got there, the first transition happened. The volunteer fire department needed additional money to operate. They needed some equipment or whatever. They came to the city, and the city agreed to give them some assistance in funding some equipment and some supplies. That was the first step towards where it actually is today, was actually getting somewhat financially dependent on the city. Just within the first few months after I got there, the fire department had an election, and it turned out to be a very politically violent election. There was some switches at the last minute, and the gentleman that thought he was going to be elected chief, there was an end run, and somebody else was elected chief, and something became very clear right then. Politics had no room in the fire department, and that's what we had right then. So that really started the major transition. it evolved over a period of time. We finally passed an ordinance basically taking over the fire department as a operating department of the city. One of the next steps was we put the appointment of the fire chief under me, which was the city administrator at that time. I think it was with with ratification or approval of the council. Probably one of the best first steps that we took. Again, sit there and had a bunch of gentlemen, and there were some ladies on the department that were really dedicating themselves. You know, taking their time out to be volunteer firemen, risking their actual lives to do the job. But all of a sudden, we were getting, this great group of people were getting split apart because, half of them were wanting this person to be chief and half of them wanting this person. So we had to try to remove the politics. So that was a first step. That was not an easy step. There was a lot of negative vibes, and they didn't want to lose control. Many of them, they did not want. Some of them would much rather have appointed or elected their own person. But anyway, that happened. We passed an ordinance. We took over the fire department. We also began appointing chiefs, and then the chief appointing his officers with, I think it was approval of the city administrator. So we put some secondary approvals in there. Hopefully, the theory being then that we would appoint the best qualified to those positions and not the most popular to those positions. The fire department went through, I guess, 2 or 3 years, even after I got there, of very, very politically tumultuous activities. There were times I was afraid the whole department would walk out. We went through several chiefs during that time. It was a tough situation to deal with. It was talk about getting some hands-on experience. I was getting some hands-on experience dealing with that. I tell people that are going to be city managers now, I say, really, everybody that's going to be a city manager deserves to have a volunteer fire department at some point in their career. The reason for that, it's one thing when you've got a paid man and a paid department answering to you. If you got a problem, you've got leverage. If you're running that operation or if you're over that operation, you tell them it's going to be this way. If you don't like it, we will accept your resignation. And that sounds cold, but I mean that's the way it is with any job. Whatever you do it the way your employer wants it done. With volunteers, you're not exactly cutting their livelihood if you remove them from the department. And second of all, they really are doing you a favor. I mean, we had a bunch of great people in that department. I never doubted that at one point. It was just a tougher situation managing volunteers than it is paid people.
You mentioned the idea of volunteer versus paid. While you were there, did the city begin paying any of the staff on the fire department? Because I know we slowly but surely began to pay, I think, first the chief and then maybe 1 or 2 others. Did any of that occur during your tenure?
Yes. In fact, again, fire department, you asked about major events. That was one of the major events. Mm-hmm. One of the other major events, there were a lot of items, there were a lot of projects going on that really weren't evident. And really some of the things I'm probably proudest of that we accomplished out there. And we began doing what I call strategic planning. We sat down as a staff and started trying to plan out what needed to happen. Instead of trying to put out grass fires and solve problems after the fact, we started doing some projections. We started saying, where do we need to have our fire department in 5 years? So we had started implementing those programs before I left. We had added through the evolution, again, first we appointed a volunteer fire chief. The second evolution was we hired a half-time fire chief. We brought Bradbury in and made him both fire chief and director of community development. So he was wearing 2 hats. That was the first step towards a paid fire department and a paid chief. The next step was we actually brought in a paid fire chief. It got to the point, really, it was not fair to Brad, and it demanded more attention than a half-time situation. So the first paid person we brought in and I hired was Ronnie Gothard. He became our first fire chief, and I understand is still with him doing a good job. So we looked long and hard to hire that first full-time chief. Again, it's not the same managing a volunteer fire department. The goal that we had set up while I was there, and I hope they're actually still doing it, was that to have a combination paid and volunteer department. where you take a city like Euless and many of the other cities around the state, we had full paid departments sitting there ready to respond. The concept that we had finally decided was the best for the colony was if we could get a nucleus of paid people in the station that could respond with the equipment, we would have a good working situation then in complement with our volunteers. The volunteers are great. The one negative thing about it, the way it was initially when I first got there, was there were two primary problems with the volunteer fire department. One was because most of our citizens commuted into Dallas or Fort Worth or wherever to work. During the daytime, we were concerned and had a personnel shortage on the volunteer fire department. That was the number one concern with a pure volunteer fire department in a place like the colony. The second concern was response time. On a volunteer fire department, the alarm goes off. There was a time lapse while volunteer firefighters responded from their homes or wherever they were to the fire station and got their equipment. Okay? Then responded to the scene. So when you compare a volunteer fire department as we were to a paid department, there was that additional time to get to the station. So we felt like if we could head towards, again, a combination where we could remove that lag time, we'd be as good as anybody. Plus, we would save a lot of money over having a fully paid fire department. So get a nucleus of a paid personnel in the station, alarm goes off, respond to the scene, let the volunteers respond to the scene. Plus, get a nucleus of trained people that can actually be fire scene commanders. That's the important thing. The other difference between, you say, a typical volunteer and, say, one of our paid personnel here is that our paid personnel are here full-time. They're getting constant training. They're making more runs. So they are actually going to be a better trained person than that volunteer. But if at least you can have a high-level trained officer commanding a fire scene, then a volunteer comes, at least he's being supervised by that person. So that was the combination we went after, and I think that's basically the direction they're still heading with. So, in summary on the fire department, there was a number of transitions, getting it to the point it is right now, and getting it on what we thought was the right track. Let's see, what else were major events? In the police department, when I got there, we had 2 officers. We hired the chief, as I said. When I left, we had, I believe it was about 14 officers, but I think the significant accomplishment in the police department was that we adopted a philosophy that we were going to be a department that would go one extra step. We would not be a department like a lot of cities have that all they're known for is giving tickets and hassling people and being a rough, tough department. That's fine. There's times that the department has to take action and give tickets, but we wanted the department to be something special. I mean, we wanted it to be a service department. And both chiefs that worked with me during my tenure out there had that philosophy, and I give them credit for that. They were very public-minded. They were very public relations-oriented. I think one of the best programs that most significant programs we adopted was the take-home car program out there. When I first got there, again, we had one fairly new squad car and one old bomb that we were using. When I left, we had 14 brand new cars sitting out there. When we only had 2 officers and a chief, you can't cover 24 hours a day with that. It takes 5 people to cover one shift around the clock. So we didn't have 24-hour police coverage. We quickly got to the point we had 5 people. So we then at least had one person on the street. But it's tough for one person to handle a major wreck or one person to handle a major incident. Plus, it's awful. I think the word would be frightening to be out on patrol in the middle of the night in the colony, Texas by yourself, knowing there's no other police personnel on duty. So we accomplished a couple of things when we went to the take-home car program. We had each of our officers in their own car. They each had a radio in there, plus they had a portable radio at the home. So there'd be a lot of times you'd see a wreck out on the highway, and you might see 4 squad cars out there working that wreck. But there was actually only 1 or 2 on duty. But the gentleman sitting at home would hear the call and would actually come out and help each other. So we actually got so much more productivity out of going with those cars. plus we got more coverage just seeing those squad cars. We let them have personal use of it. They could take their wife to the grocery store. They could take their kids to school. And if their call came in and they were needed while they were out in that car, they had to respond, even if it meant putting their wife out at the store and leaving her. So we got additional police coverage out of that. And I think we were accomplishing with the 14 officers what a lot of departments were doing with a lot more. So significant, I think, to the colony.
I was going to ask, you mentioned the service for the department. I know one of the things they do, for example, when a resident goes away for a weekend, if it's more than 2 days, the resident can call and request the police check the home. And
Vacation house check.
right, was that initiated while you were there?
Sure was. Sure was. That's just an example. I mean, there were a lot of items like that. But that's where a department's being service-minded. It's the sad part about a police force is that a lot of contact with the police department, a lot of the only contact with the police department that citizens have is if they happen to get stopped for a traffic violation. And a police department's a lot more than that. And the colony was an example of how you could make it a lot more than that. So we were pleased. And I think the police department had and still does have a good reputation out there. And it's because I think the leadership was there, and the chiefs. They set the tone, and the officers carried it out. What else was significant in the colony? We implemented building inspection was one of the first things that I did. And in retrospect, probably the best thing.
Construction?
What's that?
At building inspection at the time of construction?
Yes. One of the first people I hired after getting there was Bradbury. We brought him in to be our building official and building inspector. Brad was a super guy. He did a lot of things for the colony. He was one of those guys that if you needed him to be a manager and wear a coat and tie and go in and handle a meeting, he'd do it. If you needed him to take his shirt off and pour some concrete, which he did many times for us, he'd do it. He was just kind of the jack of all trades. We couldn't afford all these people, so Brad would just do whatever it would take. Brad was my outside person. He complimented me. I could handle the administrative part of the city, but Brad handled a lot of the operations. He helped me get the inspection program set up, checking roads that were built, checking houses that were built. And I really think that probably is the most significant thing, or one of the most significant things that was initially accomplished, was you had all these homes that were being built before the city became a city without inspection. So we got that implemented. And I think hopefully that has paid off. Hopefully the homes are being built properly, or were being built properly, and the roads are being built properly. And we were catching problems before they became greater problems. So that was a significant event. We started working on our zoning ordinance and got that adopted. Trying to get a handle again on the growth. We wanted to control the growth, not it control us. The relationship with Fox and Jacobs, we worked on that. A lot of people were concerned that Fox and Jacobs had too much control in the colony. So
I was going to say, you mentioned earlier Joe Larkin. Was he not the liaison for Fox and Jacobs?
he later became that.
Later became.
Yes. Joel, I think, played a significant part in the history of the colony. When the council, or when the colony incorporated back, I guess, January of 78, I think one of the best moves that city council made was hiring Joel as a consultant, because you had a bunch of people on the council and didn't know anything about running a city. They brought Joel in as a consultant to help them, set up ordinances, personnel procedures, and so forth.
Did he play any part in working with you, advising you also as?
Well, Joel's role was, again, he helped them hiring me. And for the first 30 days or so, Joel came out and kind of got me oriented, because he was working for the city at that point. But I guess it was just 30 to 60 days in. Joel was smart enough that he knew that his need was diminishing. Since they had me on board, they really didn't need him also. So at that point in time, he went to work for Fox and Jacobs. So his hat changed. Mm-hmm. And we had to recognize that. He wasn't working for us anymore. His interests were for Fox and Jacobs. But his interests were still for the colony because, again, a lot of people were concerned about the power that F&J had out there. They felt like they were controlling too much. Well, first of all, they were building the whole city. So I think anybody that, naturally, they were controlling the destiny of that city. But we tried to, from the council standpoint and from my standpoint and the staff standpoint, we tried to immediately establish a working relationship. And the way it was this. We respected the fact that they were the primary developer out there. But we made them quickly respect the fact that we were now a city. And we had certain powers that they were going to have to live within. And it was a good relationship. They hired Joel to become the liaison out there. So Joel was a great help in a lot of things. A lot of things we couldn't afford to do on our own, Fox and Jacobs would assist us with. We had to recognize the fact, though, again, that Joel was working for F&J. But in the long run, F&J wanted the best for the city because that was going to be a monument to them. If the colony turned out bad, it would reflect on Fox and Jacobs. If it turned out good, it would reflect on them. So they kind of made Joel available to help in any way he could. We utilized that in many ways, but again, and understand how I say it, we made sure we recognized the fact that he did work for the developer. And the city has to always maintain that fact. We have to look out for the interest of the city and the interest of the citizens, number one, first and foremost. We looked out for the developer second behind that.
Okay. Also during your time, as far as going back to, I guess, important things that happened, was the formation of the Citizens Against Taxes, the CAT group. Was that happening just as you were leaving, or was that there?
Oh, that was right in the middle.
Right in the middle.
That was right in the middle. That I'm glad you mentioned that. That was oh my goodness, cats. We started our budget process at the regular time. We went through a new budget process with the council. And what we did was we established a baseline budget, which was just what it would take to operate the city of the colony at the same level as we did last year. And then we did what we call decision packages, which were new items, like adding a new police officer became the decision package. So we took the council through a very, very professional and elaborate budget. The council just loved it because it gave them a chance to do what their job was, and that was to set the policy level and the level we were going to operate. We had a number of meetings with the council. The week before we went to a public hearing, there was about 15 people in the council one night as we were going through the budget for the last time before we actually had a public hearing on it. And one of them stood up at the end and said they were concerned about the tax increase. The tax increase that we were proposing was to go from 19 cents to 34 cents. Now, that, as the newspaper later picked up and carried, was, oh my goodness, what was it? No, 19 to what, 39 or 43? Maybe it was like 43 cents. But it was 100 and something percent tax increase, which was true. That's when you figured it, 19 cents to 43 cents, that's what it was. It was 100 and something percent increase. So the newspaper carried that. Well, these 15 people went out, and I've got to give them credit. In 1 week, they got people organized. They got people interested because it's not hard to get people's attention when you tell them that their taxes are going up 140 something percent. What didn't become clear to a lot of those citizens, we later found out that it wasn't their whole tax bill. It wasn't the mud tax and the school tax and everything going up 143%. It was just the city tax. And it only meant about $7 or $8 a month to a homeowner. Now, if I'd been out there and thought my total tax bill, which let's say was $50, $60, $100 a month, was going to double, I'd have been concerned. Okay? But see, that was getting left out. The average price home in the colony was on the market for, I think, $50 or $60. So the tax increase, like I said, I think it worked out On an average price home, I think it worked out about $7 and something a month. To a flare, which was the upper end, I think it was like 9 something, and it was 5 or 6 to like a today home. So, I'm not minimizing that. That was an increase, but it wasn't like they were getting a several $100 increase a year. It was a fairly minimal increase, and they were getting a lot of additional services for it. Well, anyway, the next week they had a meeting, and there was about 100 people in the park, and they were organizing to protest this. We were planning on having our meeting in the council chambers to have the public hearing, which was that little old building then. We decided we'd better move it to a church to have more room. So the next Monday night, we get ready to give our budget presentation, and I'll never forget, I stood up to present the budget, and the church, that Methodist church on Page Road, was completely full. It was flowing out into the parking lot. I had 4 TV cameras in my face to do the budget presentation. I figured out real quick they weren't there to give the council and myself any awards. We had to make a tough decision. We started making the presentation, and all of a sudden the people outside couldn't hear, so there was a big rumble that started. So we finally decided, let's move this meeting to the parking lot of City Hall. So there were 400 or 500 people there. We moved the meeting over there, and the mayor and I stood up on the doorsteps.
Can I interrupt?
Sure.
Say, where was the city hall at this time?
It was so where it is now, same place. We had already gotten that building there, the small building next to the fire station.
Okay, so I just wanted to.
So we moved the meeting onto that parking lot there. The mayor and I stood up there and we answered questions. Long story short, we did answer their questions. They formed we ended up meeting with them after that. I actually went to a meeting of the CATS group later. As people started finding out what the actual impact to them was, of course, nobody wants an increase at all. But when they found out that we were only talking about a few dollars a month, that we weren't talking about hundreds of dollars to them, they backed off. And it got down to there was only probably 15 to 20 people left that were actually still trying to fight us. I know we slowed down our budget process to give the people more chance to have some input. And we ended up missing a time date or something on when the budget was supposed to be filed and put into action. So then they ended up, that last little group of people that were involved with CATS ended up suing us to try to make us not put that budget into effect, and it was thrown out of court. So never heard a thing about it after that. Again, it was just communications. The word got out that their taxes were going up 100 and something percent. Percentages say one thing, dollars say another. When they found out, I'll never forget one person said, well, if I'd have known this, I wouldn't have fooled with gotten out. That was the kind of comment. It was blown out of proportion, but it taught us a lesson. It really did teach us a lesson. It said the most important thing a city can do, or the worst thing they might not do, is communicate with the citizens. Okay? We learned a lesson. We were doing a good job on the budget. It was a good budget. I didn't apologize to anybody for that increase because the colony was just forming. It needed more police officers. It needed some additional services that we weren't doing. Some of those increases were for things like putting a street maintenance crew out there. Well, you can save $1 today and cost yourself $5 later. I mean, we needed to be doing some preventive maintenance on the street. So that was why there was an increase there. There was for more police officers. We were trying to set up some communications for the police department. There wasn't any frills in there. I mean, quote, unquote, frills. There were services for the citizens that we needed to operate that city. But communications. We learned that lesson. You've got to communicate with your citizens.
This is going back a little bit, but when you were still administrative assistant and the charter was being written, did you feel that or anticipate that the charter would provide for a city manager type of government? Did you have any input into that with the people who were working on the charter?
There never was really a lot of question as to whether there should or shouldn't be a city manager. When I accepted the job, I went in with the understanding that probably the next January I would become city manager. Probably would not have gone in if I hadn't have been that assured of that. And I wasn't guaranteed that, but I was told even at that early stage that I was hired that everything goes as is planned, they're going to adopt a charter. They are planning on going with the city manager form of government, and you will be appointed. So I went in with that understanding, but I really did not have that much discussion or meeting with that charter commission. They did a good job, and they handled it by themselves. I mean, I'm sure I talked to a few of the members because I knew some of the members after I got out there, but they really got out and researched it and did their homework. And that was my only primary concern. The city manager form of government, and first of all, let me admit I'm biased because I am a city manager, but it is the best form of government for a city. The theory, and it actually works, is that council represents the citizens and they're the policymakers. They determine what the level of the budget is going to be. They determine what services we're going to offer. They determine whether we're going to have a library or not have a library. And they have to answer to the people. They hire a city manager who works for them, but that city manager then runs the administrative part of the city. It's a good system. You don't need, as we said earlier, 6 people trying to hire and fire people because you get personalities involved then. You don't need 6 people trying to decide which kind of tires to buy.
You mentioned something a minute ago, and I'm going to call, I guess, for a personal opinion here. You said if the colony turned out either good or not so good, it was going to reflect on Fox and Jacobs. I guess it's sort of a double question. How do you feel so far the colony reflects on Fox and Jacobs? And when you were working there, how did you, you mentioned a little bit about how Fox and Jacobs participated with the colony. I'm thinking that you did not see much problem between them more or less letting go and letting the city grow on its own, but was the transition really fairly smooth, and how do you think it turned out to reflect on them?
Oh, I think it was fairly smooth. I mean, needless to say, there were ups and downs, and there were hills we had to overcome. And there were times that I think we felt like they should actually have done more. I mean, you see some other areas that have developed, like the colony. Really the developer could have done a lot of the things. I look back and I say now, what could they have done? Actually, even before the city became a city, the developer could have done some of the projects, say a library. If they had have really sat down and done and have really master planned that city out and really have known how it was going to take off and how it was going to move, like a library. They could have built a library at the very beginning and just put a little bit of extra charge into the homes that they built later. And they could have accomplished some of those things much quicker than have actually been accomplished. So I think there were times we felt like they could have done more. But the transition was good. We did not want them telling us how to run our city. That was not their place after we became a city. But I think we had a smooth working relationship with them. How it's turned out, I think overall it's done good. I think you're seeing some improvements in the transportation system out there as far as roads and so forth. I think if I may say, the proudest thing I left out there was I left an organization in place. We had a good staff when I left. There was a plan for that staff to grow. I mean, we knew where it was going, and there were competent people heading up the departments. And to me, that's the most important thing a manager can leave, is an organization that can progress without him. I think that's still in place out there. I think it's doing good. I think one of the best things that's happened is probably F&J letting some additional development come in. I think the most negative thing would be to have had it totally Fox and Jacobs. I'm glad to hear, and this has happened since I left, that there are some new builders out there. That's good. You don't need the same type of house throughout the community. So I'm pleased with the way it came out. A disappointment. I've talked about all the good things. We had 2 major events we had out there. Was a bond election in, was it 78 or 79? Maybe it was 79. We had our first bond election. And then in 80 we had it again. I don't know why taxes and so forth were such a big concern out there then. I think we cut ourselves short. We tried to build a city hall twice out there. It failed both times by just a few votes. That's a disappointment. And I think a good comparison is to take Euless, Texas. Euless is a town that's similar to the colony. It started out and developed out much the way the colony is developing. There's no, quote, downtown in Euless. It just, kind of evolved out, and there's shopping centers now, but there's no downtown. This city, years ago, went out, gambled a little bit, spent a little money, and built this complex you see right here. This complex has really become the nucleus for Euless. The thing I kept telling people out there was I planned on staying for several years. I didn't plan on staying and enjoy this big city hall, and I know I had a couple of accusations that I was trying to build this Taj Mahal. I didn't really plan on staying and occupying it, to be very honest. I had a kind of a set plan. I was going to stay for a while and move on. But I wanted the colony to have something like this complex that would become a nucleus. The colony doesn't have a downtown. It needed a focus point, kind of a point of pride. It was more than just a place for city employees to work. It was going to become a place for the city to kind of evolve around. So we lost that twice. I think the colony, I think they lost out on that. Number one, we would have sold those bonds at a very low interest rate at that time. Number two, we would have built those projects at a lot cheaper dollars than they're going to build it at now. I think the colony, there would have been some pride built around that by now. The library, I fought for the library, and that was another disappointment. We did not get the library implemented until after. It did not get implemented until after I left. But I hope if anything's ever remembered out there was in that last budget I prepared, there was money to start a library, and that's something I wanted. One of the most bloody fights that I fought out there was to build and start a Parks and Recreation program. I wanted to see programs for the kids and programs for the adults. That we didn't have anything. So I guess maybe another thing that I look back on, kind of smile when I look back, is that, and there was a lot of opposition to it, I finally got enough money budgeted that we started a Parks and Recreation program, and it was somewhat innovative. We went up with North Texas State University and contracted with them to come down and actually become our Parks and Recreation department. So for $12,000, we got a program put on for us that first summer, which is as good as this city has this summer. And we've got a number of paid people on our staff right here. Okay? But they came down, and for $12,000, we hired students. We hired a student that became, quote, our director of Parks and Recreation. We hired him a staff. These were just part-time people that were doing their recreation degrees in North Texas. But that program was so successful that later we got the money to pick up that same gentleman full-time and become our director. It was Rick Harrell. And we had some great programs. I mean, we had movies. We were putting on movies and kind of had our own little movie theater. We had a summer camp for the kids. We had classes being put on. We didn't have a rec center or anything. We were just doing it. We'd find a place. So that was the start of a Parks and Recreation program out there. And dadgummit, we needed it. And some people just couldn't see spending the money. They felt like really the only thing you should spend money on was police and fire. And I'm the first to say that police and fire is important. We have to have it in any city. But if you can't put some of your dollars into creating what I call, and called then, a quality of life, I don't want to live in that city. A city has to have quality of life. And quality of life is made up of more than a police and fire department. It's that library out there. It's those parks that you can go to and enjoy. It's the recreation program you can take advantage of. And there's a lot more things, but that's the beginning of it, and that's some things the city can do. That same bond election, that first bond election, we lost a swimming pool, and that really surprised me. There was opposition against it, and some people campaigned for it to pass. And, I probably would not have personally have used that pool. I was single at that time, and, that was not my emphasis on my recreation needs, was having a swimming pool. But I just thought the city needed a swimming pool. There needed to be a place in the summer that the kids could go enjoy. I mean, there were some families out there that had personal pools, but that was a small percentage. So I was really disappointed when that pool lost. And you may be picking up something now. It's because I had a role in the beginning. It kind of became a personal thing to me. I still follow the colony because it was, for whatever, I had a little bit of a role in developing that, and I'm proud of it. I'm not saying there weren't mistakes and there weren't problems, but we accomplished something, and I wanted it to have a swimming pool. I wanted it to have a library system, and when you got down to it, the cost was so insignificant. It was really so insignificant for the good we would have gotten out of it.
Tom, I understand that at one point F&J did provide both a small pool and a small rec center for the city, but they were more or less left to volunteer management or whatever. Because of lack of management, they were either destroyed or filled in. Was that happening anytime during your tenure?
I think the rec center was a building that they had the kids could take advantage of. I think it burned down. The swimming pool was out there, and they filled. That was before I got there.
Okay, I didn't know if you'd been. You mentioned your resignation at one point there. At what point did you finally decide that it was time for you to change your situation? What was it? What were some of the deciding factors that made you do that? And one of the questions here is, do you believe it was the right decision? I think I know the answer to that because you seem quite content with where you are here and feel like you're fulfilling yourself. But go ahead and fill us in.
Oh, was it the right time? I mean, things have been. I think I've been a very fortunate person since I left there, so I cannot complain. I'm happy. Professionally, I have prospered and progressed. From the standpoint, was it the right thing at that time? From a personal standpoint, I worked my little tail off out there. It was tough. Not having a staff to deal with at the beginning, it was a tough job. So I was personally ready for a change. From a second standpoint, I really think it was good for the city. And I've got to explain that. I mean, when you sit here and say you think it's good for the city for you to leave, I went out there, again, I had about 4 years, I think pretty good experience when I got there, as I said. And I loved the colony. I mean, I was proud of the colony. So I did everything I knew how to do to make it a good place to live. But let me underline that I knew how to do. I think from the colony standpoint, it was probably good to bring in new management, new leadership, bring in some new people that are new manager that might have a better way of doing something. Or he may have some expertise in an area that I didn't have. I had accomplished quite a bit in 3 years. If I'd have stayed on, we would have accomplished more. But I think the new blood gave it a chance to come in and challenge what had been done to that point and say, was it good, bad, or indifferent? Was it right or wrong? Is there a better way to do it? And if need be, change some of the things that had been being done. And second of all, possibly bring some new ideas into the colony. So yeah, I think it was a good time for both me to leave. I think it was a good time for the city to leave.
What was it that actually
probably the last
made
thing
the decision?
that made the decision was one of the most negative things that happened in the colony was an incident we had with the police department out there. It happened, when would it have been? 1981. We had some officers that, for their own reasons, felt like that the present police chief needed to leave. They went around both him and me and went to the council with a number of problems and allegations, and then those got totally blown out of proportion. It got a lot of got a lot of press attention. It became a very negative factor to the city. Long story short on that, out of those five people, one of them ended up, they all resigned to get those items accomplished. out of their list, there were some things that needed to be improved, and there were some improvements made from there. Well, I think we came out better for it in the end. They all 5 left, but one of them ended up publicly apologizing and saying that the actions were really wrong that they had taken, and that person was ended up being hired back, and as I understand it, still a very good, productive member of that department. Another one of them ended up going on and running for the council. And I remember talking to that gentleman later, and he said, well, he says, at the time I thought it was right, but he says, that's past history. So that was the last thing that blew up, and it had been, like I said, I had gone through so many things at that point in time. I mean, between the cat deal and then that, and just the politics had been vicious. I mean, they had really been vicious. That it was time for a change. So that was the last thing that kind of blew up. I resigned, stayed on about 2 months after that. We got the department put back together. I think still a number of those people are there. Before I left, we had an excellent police department again, and we had a good one even before that. I'm sorry some of those people took that action because I personally liked those people, and they were good officers. So I'm sorry they left. I'm sorry that happened, but it did. We replaced them. Good people, good department. Things went on.
You mentioned the viciousness of the politics. How, in your position, were you able to deal with that situation?
I've wondered about that. I talk to other city managers now, and it is remarkable, I think, probably that I lasted 3 years in the colony of Texas, because city managers were not exactly long-tenured people in many cities. There were times that I think I ended up in the middle. There were times I think the politics were going on so fast and furious, and there were such strong feelings about each other that I kind of got left out of it. We tried to stay fair, first of all. The administration was run, and the one thing I'll say is we ran an ethical administration. We ran a fair administration. We looked at every side. So, we kept ourselves to the point that you couldn't fault us on those areas. I don't know how we made it 3 years. It was the I look back, and it was politics almost was a game out there. I think there was no recreation out there, so people would run for council and get active in politics, and I think it was almost something to do. I mean, it was the city pastime to sit around and say, well, what do we want to talk about the city today? I would go visit people out there, even council members, and that was all they wanted to talk about. Well, what's happening over here? What's happening over here? I mean, it got to the point, you were actually living that job 24 hours a day.
You said you'd go visit people. Did you have a home in the colony when you were?
I bought a home in the colony, and I was right out in the middle of it there. Yeah, it wasn't exactly the most fun place for a single person to be, but what the heck? It was a great 3 years out of my life.
The question here, you may have already touched into this. What do you feel was your most significant contribution to the city?
Touched on that pretty well. I guess in summary was, I think, the administration we put together. I think that's still in place. The direction that the fire department is still going in today. I think the police department, the planning that we did in the other areas and the ordinances that were passed, that was all done. We put them on a path that they're pretty well still staying with, and I'm proud of that. We built some facilities during that time. That city hall was a major accomplishment. You wouldn't believe what it took to get that little building that's out there right now. So it was just incident after incident.
Well, you say you still stay in touch with the city. What do you personally see as the future for the city?
What do I see as the future of the colony, Texas? I think the colony is going to and I think will even more so with the development along 121 of EDS and those facilities, is going to become a very key city. The commercial is starting to come in now. There's going to be room for more. One of the biggest problems then, and is partially corrected now, but eventually I think will even be solved, is probably the road system getting in and out of the colony. I think that's the thing that we would have liked to have corrected the most, but it's just not a quick fix on that. But eventually that is going to be fixed. The tollways coming out there, 121 is going to be widened. The Carrollton Highway down there is going to be widened. So eventually you're going to be able to solve that problem. Plus the employment base is going to move out closer to the colony. So I see some good things happening there with all that coming in. Right now, the colony is kind of I don't know what you'd call it. It's I guess it's like a second-tier suburb right now. And by that, here's Dallas. Then you've got a first-tier ring of suburbs. You've got Carrollton, Farmers Branch, Plano. The colony is a second tier. What happens in the development of a metroplex like this is when you got that first ring of suburbs, the shopping went into Dallas. Okay? People lived in the first ring and went into Dallas to shop. Then you got the second ring, which is the colony. Now the shopping started springing up in Carrollton, Plano, Farmers Branch. So now this ring goes here. Okay? You're going to see with all this development coming in along 121, you're going to see Little Elm and those areas further out start to develop out with people. So you're going to see the need for shopping coming into the area of the colony, which is going to strengthen the commercial base of the city. So I see that's good. The city needs to be balanced. It needs a commercial base. It needs some industrial base. I think it needs different type of housing. That's why I'm glad there's new builders in there. I understand there's probably some question as to multifamily now. I don't personally think that's all that bad. I don't want to have a city all multifamily, but I don't know what you don't want kind of a variety of housing for people. So I think the colony will become, like Euless, will become a more self-sufficient, supporting city as time goes by. The road problems will get solved. People will be able to work closer instead of having to go so far. Colony's got a good future. They need to put some money right now into a couple of things. They need to put an emphasis in getting their facilities built now that they need. They need to put an emphasis into quality of life.
Facilities such as
Their police station, their city hall, their library, their recreation buildings. They need to get those facilities because that'll lead into putting the emphasis, like I'm fixing to say, into quality of life. They need to establish that. They need to make it a quality of life living in the colony. And then most important, they need to be aggressive on their code enforcement. They need to make sure that there maintains aesthetic quality, that their roads are maintained. They spend money to keep those roads repaired. Don't let them fall apart. To make sure houses stay in good order, in good shape. So put some code enforcement out there and make sure the colony stays quality. It can have a good future.
we're pretty much near the end of the interview here. I was just wondering, do you have just any general comments of your own that you would like to make?
No, it's an interesting city. There's not many like it that have started out and developed out that way. It was enjoyable watching it develop. People don't realize that everything had to develop. The social structure, the churches, the clubs, the organizations, the physical, actual infrastructure of the city. So it was interesting watching that, and it was fun being a part of it. 3 years was enough, but I wouldn't trade for those 3 years. I know I got some experience there. I just hope when it's all said and done, I left something. So with that, I would close. I hope I left a mark there that will turn out to be positive.
Well, Mr. Hart, I appreciate your time for this interview, and I appreciate your comments, and thank you for participating in our project.
Good deal. Thank you.